compliance isn't about AI. It's about a process, right? We have to think of it this way. Am I using this tool in a way that maintains my regulatory obligations? The tool may be perfectly appropriate for, let's say, drafting SOPs. This is an area that we see as low-hanging fruit. It's AI is used in that space, but completely inappropriate for batch releases. That particular AI, the intended use determines how we validate it based on the validation burden. So our documentation needs to include the risk classification, and that's very fundamental. How am I using this AI tool? What is the risk associated with it? Vendors don't transfer accountability. Right? There's no vendor contract transfers that regulatory accountability. We are responsible, period. We leverage the vendor's documentation. That's part of the CSA approach that the FDA encouraged a while ago. And that's great. We can take a look at a vendor's SOC 2 report. We can take a look at and use, validation packages they may have, model cards, but we own the risk assessment. If a vendor, or I should say, if a regulator comes and asks us, how did you come up with this answer using a model? We better be able to replicate it. That's the ability for us to be able to show transparency. Just by saying human in the loop, any human can do it is unacceptable. The vendor said it was validated. I've heard that numerous times. And then it becomes a question of, well, validated for whom? Under what conditions? What was the specific use case? That's the burden that we have to establish.
I've been telling a lot of folks in 2026, right? We are moving past the pilot phase. So it's no longer sitting in a set box that we're turning on. It's actually becoming, and I say this as partially a pun, but it's becoming the operating tissue of platforms, right? Veeva, AP, and even in many of our LIMS systems. We need to stop treating AI like it's a one-off IT project. First thing, it's not only an IT project. This is not something that is static. So that means that instead of like a massive revalidation every year or every so often, we have to use automated golden data sets or such to verify that the AI's logic hasn't drifted right from, after that platform update. The platform provider owns the infrastructure and the sovereign AI guardrails, right? I was talking about the sovereignty earlier. So like keeping our data isolated. But we own the context of the use. Nothing can be in a black box. It has to be I'm going to call it, instead of a black box, it has to be in a transparent box, right? We have to be able to understand it. We have to be able to see it. You have to demand, everybody who's listening, everybody who's watching, you have to demand model cards from your vendor to prove that the output is traceable. It is still the human in the loop. And that is very, very important. So it's about using AI. And I keep saying AI is not a replacement. You have to shift the mindset that the AI is we have to shift our mindset from being the author to the reviewer. But it is still our accountability.
For generative AI, natural language processing function of drafting SOPs or regulated documents, being able to do those more quickly in a standardized, harmonized fashion. That is a tremendous savings. In drug safety is a target-rich environment where you have medically qualified people performing sometimes repetitive, mundane tasks that the AI can do for them in draft mode, whether it's narratives or signal detection, looking at adverse events and anomalies. But there again, their time is spent looking at the outliers.
The way we are right now working and as well as helping customers is, helping them on the deviation CAPA analysis, which we see frequently, a lot of requests coming to us, as well as audit readiness, as well as risk assessment based on AI-driven, as well as automated change impact analysis, and also AI-enabled training recommendations. John knows about all the things.
Yeah, so this is a very real concern that we sort of hear and get all the time. And this is because it's a stereotype, but it's true. Lawyers in particular and the in-house teams, would just love to say no because that's, the sort of safest thing. And then often, that sort of leads to the legal team being circumvented because they're slowing down the business needs. And, we just have to sort of get to this. And then, that's obviously no good. So part of that is, a legal team itself needs to be able to be flexible and able to adapt and sort of take into consideration certain business realities and certain regulatory realities to be able to function flexibly with the business team. I understand there's sort of certain things that are absolutely prohibited, but I understand there might be some flexibility or some gray area in some of these other things. Can you work with us to help develop a strategy that we feel like is going to align with our business incentives and that's taking on a reasonable amount of risk? And here's the kind of risk that I'm comfortable with. I'm willing for a regulator to come knock on our door so long as we can tell them a story about here's how we really interpreted that and we thought it was okay. So I think enabling your legal team to think creatively, rather than sort of their knee-jerk reaction is often the key to moving forward. One exception where we see this come up is related to functions in HR, in particular for hiring, firing, promotion, sort of things like that, because these are cases where there's lots of AI tools and lots of vendors out there, but because they're being used in a way that impacts high-stake decisions, it can trigger a lot of additional regulatory aspects. And it's unique from a lot of the other pieces we've been talking about, where having a human in the loop, A, is very critical, and B, can help, sort of minimize the oversight. Whereas in this case, often it's irrelevant that you have a human in the loop. So you might think, well, it's finding resumes for me and sort of suggesting candidates, but there's still a human who's making the decision. Therefore, I'm not regulated. But the laws are not drafted that way. They are sort of immediately implicated as soon as it's doing something that even impacts or could impact a high stakes decision like that. So
it really is. And it's been the same thing, I think, for the last, 10, 20 years in my career. It jumps from, well, it works on my laptop, so it must work for my 5,000 employees, right? And it's really often underestimated, like what that scale takes. So you have to have clear ownership, right? Like a chief AI officer, a cross-functional, AI steering committee. You can't build a skyscraper on a swamp. Core data foundations, I think, is another piece. You cannot automate what you haven't organized. I'm going to call this now validation paralysis, right? Particularly in regulated industries, we really get stuck in trying to apply all these validation techniques to all of these, new models. We have to think about, and if we keep waiting for this zero risk, we're going to never deploy. So we have to just, experiment in ways that we can scale carefully. And again, human in the loop. And then I always say it's not only about the technology, it's about the people, it's about the workflow, it's about the culture. So making sure we bring people along with us. We can't forget, leaders can't just buy the tools and forget the people.
One of the things that I think that, we see often, and that probably would be my sort of, word of advice is there's so much of this, FOMO related to AI because it's just everywhere. It's super exciting. People are reading about other people using it. You're talking to other people sort of using it. And it's led to this lack of kind of purpose-driven deployments. And so oftentimes, there's not a specific problem teams are trying to solve. They just have AI and they want to grab it and throw it at something. And when it does not grow sort of organically out of what kind of a need could this AI be used to meet, those end up being sort of very short-lived projects. And so I think often the key to building something that is both robust, and has that sort of staying power to really grow and sort of be useful to you, it's often to, at its inception, really think through what is the targeted problem that I want to solve here.
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I believe it all comes back to governance as the center of the universe, because how we train our people, how we deploy AI, whether it's a pilot or some other aspect of a new technology, it's part of the governance process. We see that pilots sometimes are not fully deployed throughout the enterprise because of a very simple lack of awareness. There's a great pilot, works wonderfully. You bring it to another manufacturing site and they're saying, well, wait a minute, What is this? You want me to use it? I'm unaware of it. So there's a number of issues like that we see pop up that cause resistance that could have been overcome if there were more forward-looking organization change management and deployment planning.
AI does not fail because of technology. It fails because organizations are not prepared to operate it responsibly. The companies that succeed in 2026 will be those that build AI governance, validation, and operating models before regulators force the issue.